Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Real Science Exchange, the podcast where leading scientists and industry professionals meet over a few drinks to discuss latest ideas and trends in animal nutrition. Today, we're going to be discussing a presentation that was given by Andrea Lendewig. She's the head of research at IFCN, and the topic was the global dairy market status and 2035 perspective. So there's kind of two elements of that. We're gonna look at what the status of the dairy markets are today, and then she's going to project out and take a look at what we're going to be doing in what the perspectives looks like in 2035. We've invited several guests to join us today. One is Philipp Goetz. He's the head of business development at IFCN, and we've also got Lucas Fess. He's a senior analyst for Rabobank. And then, last but not least, we got Jeremy Painter. He's the head of the Balchem's Animal Nutrition and Health unit here at Balchem. And so we've got quite a star-studded panel for this discussion today. I'd like to start off with some introductions. And Andrea, since you gave the presentation back in December, please kind of give us an overview of yourself and your credentials, please.
Sure. So I work in IFCN, as you said already, for 4 years. I'm the head of research and development, and we work mainly is with data. We collect the data once per year and do some data mining as well, with some updates per month for the main countries, and the main indicators that we work with are everything related to milk production. Milk prices are the ones that we monitor the closest, but of course, anything regarding to dairy is important and relevant for us.
Yeah, very well. Thank you. You also brought a guest with you to the pub tonight, your colleague, Philipp Goetz. Philip, you and I have met before. I've been to the IFCN conference, I think 3 times now. I just like to state I'm a huge fan of IFCN. Balchem is a partner. I love the conferences, and looking forward to the next one. And I would just like to say, anybody listening to this, I highly encourage you guys to seek out IFCN and see if you can partner with them as well. It's just a great source of data and information. So, Philip, with that, go ahead and introduce yourself, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Scott, for the short introduction already. So, and the nice words. So, yeah, as mentioned, my name is Philipp Goetz. I'm head of sales and business development in IFCN. I studied agricultural business and developing all the models on the forecasting, on the milk prices, milk production into the future, short-term and long-term forward, and upgraded those. And working with you, Scott, and more than 130 other dairy-related businesses here to provide them insights and to help them to support to make smarter and better decisions related to the dairy world.
Yeah. Good. Well, thank you for all that you do. I mentioned that we've got quite a cast of characters here. We got Lucas Fess from Rabobank. I see IFCN and Rabobank as the 2 premier data suppliers to the dairy industry, and we're privileged to have Lucas with us here. Lucas and I met at the milk conference in where was that? Vegas back in December. Yes. He gave a presentation there that I thought was excellent, and I thought you guys would make a great team. And so looking for the conversation. With that, Lucas, kind of give us some background on yourself.
Sounds good. Thanks for the very kind words. Thanks for having me. Yeah, Lucas Fees. I sit in Chicago with Rabobank. Some people know we have a team of dairy researchers all around the world, and I cover kind of the North American markets for the bank. Everything from market outlook, price forecast, trend analysis, essentially almost being an internal dairy consultant to the bank, but most importantly to our clients as well. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, you bet. I understand you grew up on a dairy in New York. Tell me a little bit about that. So
I did. Yeah. I like to say I've been in dairy my whole life, between growing up on the farm, studying it in school, and then launching my career at Glanbia, then moving to High Ground, then Rabobank. But yes, my family still has a dairy farm in New York, close to Syracuse, New York area. They milk around 300 cows there, and try to get home a few times a year to see the family and see the farm. So it's still an important part of my family and my life.
All right, excellent. Thank you for that. Jeremy Painter.
Yeah, I'm Jeremy Painter, and I'm Balchem's Vice President of the Global Commercial Operations for our Animal Nutrition and Health division. So I look after kind of the ANH businesses around the world. And Scott, don't tell anyone, but I actually grew up on a beef cattle farm, not a dairy background, in central Missouri. So I'm a farm kid, and I went to Mizzou for my undergraduate in agriculture economics, and then I went to Purdue for a master's in ag econ as well. So I always find these topics, very fascinating, and certainly as we, work internally within the Balchem group, we spend a lot of time talking about dairy markets and how it impacts our business, but also externally as well. So we spend a huge amount of time interfacing with dairy producers, with nutritionists, with consultants that are in the dairy space, in the dairy sector every day, and certainly this is one of the top topics that they always want to discuss is, what's the outlook, how is milk prices, what's cheese doing, what's butter doing, all these, things I find very fascinating. So looking forward to this discussion, and I think we'll, hopefully share some nice insight into what the industry can expect, in the next, 1 month to 10 years, it sounds like. So
yeah, excellent. Thank you for that, Jeremy. Now, this is the point in the podcast where I usually propose a toast to a great podcast. I'm sure we're going to have one. I just got coffee, but everybody does as well. So cheers, everyone. Here's to a great podcast.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Right.
In honor of the podcast, I'm trying the new protein milk from Starbucks for the very first time. So I know it's been out for a few weeks, but I thought I'd pay the upcharge this morning and try it out.
Oh, that's excellent. And that's kind of a question I was going to ask to see if there's what kind of ramifications or opportunities that's going to have for the dairy industry. So let's not forget to dive into that, Lucas.
Awesome.
Yeah, sounds good. Andrea, with that, why don't you kind of start us off by kind of giving us an overview of the presentation that you gave us back in December? The economics of feeding ReAssure precision release choline. ReAssure is fed during the transition period, and because it's fed for such a short period of time, it costs just $15 per cow, and yet the benefits will continue to generate income throughout the year. Cows fed ReAssure produce 5 pounds more colostrum, which pays for your ReAssure investment on the very first day of lactation. Cows fed ReAssure also produce 5 pounds more milk per day, every day. That means after the first day, every day is payday. Invest in ReAssure during the transition period and recoup your investment on the very first day of lactation. After that, you got it, payday.
Yes, well, we were touching some interesting points. Of course, at the time, we still were analyzing or presenting data from 2024, but with the latest updates, because we had closed formally our data collection with the researchers that contribute with the network. And one of the key points was that the milk production crossed 1 billion tons, and which was like very positive for dairy. We were also talking about where this milk was coming from, because somehow it was coming from everywhere, but also some regions were struggling. We had the US, for example, was always performing well throughout the whole year, and also in 2025, but the EU was struggling a little bit more until mid-2025. So even for 2025, the increase was very, very slow. But towards the end, then suddenly everything against predictions started to increase production. And we were seeing changes of 4 or 5% in most of the EU countries that were causing a difference. And then we saw other regions like China still increasing in production with some struggles, but last year and the previous year, but is of course still not self-sufficient, depending very much on the international markets. And also other regions in Latin America struggling in 2024, but in 2025, improvement in weather conditions. Again, Brazil, Argentina increasing in production. And the other point that was also very interesting was to analyze the developments of the milk price and how it has been linked to butter and butter prices and butter production over the past year. So since probably 2015, so almost 10 years, the trends have separated regarding the commodity prices, and butter is and cheese are separated, but butter even more, reaching very high prices in 24, 25 with some declines, but now in 26 we are seeing again some increases in butter prices, and how this has been impacting the world milk price, at least the IFCN world milk price indicator, which is the one we estimate every month based on the 5 main dairy commodities of the Oceania. And another point that was also very interesting and that we are still talking about it is the net exports from the US regarding butter. So the US for over 10 years was net importer of butter, but then in 2025, it became net exporter of butter. One of the reasons was due to the advantage in the prices. So the US compared to the EU and Oceania was much lower prices, and this was creating additional competitiveness. And it was an advantage for the trade of the US regarding butter. Then we were also discussing a little bit about our network and how we were collecting data for farm level and how important this data has been for us when we want to analyze what is going on exactly at the farm level, how are farmers being affected by the whole market situation, and how the cost of milk production has been increasing in most of the countries, at least for around 75 of the countries were having costs that were above 40 US dollars, which is quite high. So it has represented around 20% higher costs over the past 5 years, and how this has been impacting farmers all around the world, but also that the price, the cost has been different for different farms or different countries, and how in Poland it was even reaching the levels of other EU 27 countries that usually in the past was not like that. Now they are also facing higher costs, and the exception was China. China actually declined in costs over the past 5 years, but they were also at very high levels. One of the
I
other
think
points
that's
that, yeah,
I just wanted to jump in there. I think
please.
um, going back to your milk price or milk production growth over
Mhm.
the past several months, completely agree there. And I think the term that you used was a little bit against predictions, and especially across several of those EU countries. I mean, to see that growth, I mean, numbers like 5 to 6% in Germany and France, some of the the leading milk producing countries in Europe is wild. And then I think also, just for the viewers or listeners, when we consider milk growth at 4% in the US, I mean, that's a big number. But then if you look at the volume of milk in the EU at more than, 50% larger than the US. So you've got a larger percentage gain on top of a larger volume. And it was just an almost unbelievable growth over the past few months. Extremely, extremely wild to see, I think.
Yes,
And,
it
and what were
was.
the drivers for that?
It
What
was.
switched?
Yes, well, it was very, at the beginning, we were quite shocked because, as you know, we also do forecasts. So we do short term outlooks, and we were not predicting that. We were saying basically stable or slight increases. And then suddenly this happened, and we were checking the data once and again. Probably we did a mistake. No, it's like that. Okay. Now the question is why? What happened? Well, there are multiple reasons. Philip, please feel free to jump in if I forget something.
Sure.
But weather conditions was one thing. Last year was not a good year, so base year effect is also there. Regarding animal diseases, we had animal diseases last year. We didn't have animal diseases this year. Then is the replacement. Then it was cattle prices were high, so farmers were keeping cows for longer. And of course, if cows are there, milk is produced, right? So now the questions is now into the future. What does it mean for the future? For how long is it going to stay
Andrea,
like this?
maybe before going into the future, what also was another driver was the high milk prices, which we have been seeing. So we have been seeing record high milk prices in Europe. And normally, if everything would be, Lucas, most likely you're looking also, as you mentioned, in the trends and what has been happening in the past and how the future then is, or what will be the impact then on real time. Normally, with such high milk prices, milk should have been activated even much earlier. So it was also a bit of surprise. First of all, it was not activated. And then out of nothing, no, not out of nothing, but out of sudden in August.
Yeah, the pace that it came on. Yeah.
Exactly. No one was expecting that this pace is really coming then through the roof.
Yeah. And I think those are arguments too, not just for Europe specifically, but everywhere globally, right? I mean, good weather everywhere, South America, Oceania generally included, maybe Oceania running into a little bit of issues right now, but New Zealand most likely still going to have a record milk producing season. But yeah, weather, lack of animal diseases, whether it was blue tongue going away in Europe or bird flu going away in the US, good margins, good economics, just all around perfect, well, I shouldn't say perfect, but very close to perfect situation in all of those key regions.
Exactly. All the planets suddenly got aligned and then milk was there.
And it's really an interesting, scenario as well. Andrea, you mentioned, beef prices or cattle prices in general. And, we see the same phenomena in the US. You have record high, beef prices. It's producing, extremely strong incentive for dairy producers then to, produce beef on dairy crosses, right? Which then further limits the supply of heifers and actual dairy producing animals going back into the herd. But at the same time, you have high dairy prices, you have high cheese prices, you have high butter prices. So we kind of have this collision of worlds going on, which I think is really, really fascinating. And for the longest time in the US, we'd seen obviously a pretty steadily decreasing dairy herd. And some of that's just economics as small farms go out of production, but also as people sold into kind of the strong beef market. And I think that's finally starting to reverse a bit slightly, and headcount's actually starting to come back up here a bit. But it'll be interesting to see how this kind of dairy versus beef battle plays out, I think, in the US and globally as well. And I'd be kind of curious if others on the phone have an opinion on that and how you see that outlook really impacting kind of milk production in the next maybe 12 to 18 months.
Yeah. But even this decline in the number of animals that you were mentioning, even that trend stop, at least for a while. Probably it will catch up again, but at least for a while, okay, I think for the first time in 10 years or something like that in Germany, the decline stopped in the number of animals, so which is not a trend that we were expecting either.
Right. And we've kind of stabilized in the U.S. as well. I think it's sitting maybe around 9.3, million animals right now. But that had been steadily declining and now has started to stabilize. I think actually upticked a bit here in the last maybe few months. So now I don't know if that's going to have a real material impact and if that's a longer term sustained trend. But it's really fascinating to watch, though. So
yeah, it's been a little bit more substantial than that. Actually, we actually added more than 200,000 cows over the past, call it 18 months or so, which is quite unprecedented growth, and it brought the U.S. herd back to levels not seen since the 1990s. So we're at multi-decade highs there on cow numbers, but it's exactly for the reason that you stated, right? I mean, the revenue impact of beef on dairy cross calves is so substantial that it has radically changed breeding, reproductive decisions, and that whole calculus of replacements on farm because of the revenue and income potential of that 4-day-old calf that you essentially have no money into the animal, and all of a sudden they're worth $1,200, $1,300, $1,400. So I think someone else mentioned it too, keeping cows in the herd for longer, definitely seeing that in the US as we try to balance the lack of replacements and the allure of breeding to beef with the number of dairy calves that we need to produce for replacements. So yeah, I think it's just also like wildly skewed any of the economic drivers as well, because when you convert that calf revenue into a dollars per hundredweight equivalent, you can be looking at $3 to $4 equivalent from non-milk revenue, which completely skews any economic signal of lower milk prices if you're still able to break even. So for all those reasons, I think there's limited potential for U.S. milk to slow this year or even into 2027.
Yeah, Lucas, to kind of borrow an old phrase, is this the new normal for milk production in the U.S. and globally? And if so, for how long?
We're definitely stronger than the long-term average. Our calculations, we put long-term U.S. milk production growth around 1.5% per year. So if you look at 2024, 2025, we were up around 2.8% leap year adjusted. 26, Rabobank forecasts close to 2% growth. But I think that the pull of the beef revenue is not going to end in the short term. It will take years for that herd to rebuild. We might not see revenue potential at the highs that we saw into late 2025, but revenues will still be there. So we do anticipate U.S. milk production growth to be elevated a little bit higher than normal over the next few years.
Yeah. Andrea and Philip, do you see this beef on dairy trend taking root in Europe or in other parts of the world, or not so yet? Just kind of curious about that.
That's a good question. I really don't know. Probably is something that is just happening at the moment. Might be some noise, might not stay. In Europe, especially environmental regulations are very, very much strict, and the number of animals is very, very much controlled. So that's, yes, please.
Adding also additionally, we have in Europe a totally different structure of dairy farming than in the US over there. So you have, for us, a big farm is 300, 500 cows even, which is for you, is it already a farm or not? Let's say like this. So or is it more a hobby? So I think this is also why, even with less farms, and you have a totally different, or the owners of the farms have a totally different incentive also to produce or to not only produce break even, but also to even produce more and to increase production. While we also have, as Andrea mentioned, the limitation on the natural resources as well, like the land availability. So if we are just looking at Europe, which is whole Europe, I think it's somehow as big as the US in general. So we have here in Europe more than 1 million farms. So a lot of small farms still. So there's still upside potentials, but also a lot of limitations, and the investment behaviors for farmers, they don't know how and where to invest.
Yeah.
Especially with all the regulations coming up, with the whole EU legislations changing, don't know in which direction it is going. And then it is also that it's not that easy to build a barn just, I don't know, from one to another month or from one to another year. You really need to think out if it is really an investment into the future for next 20 years or so. And looking at the age structure of the farmers of 55 and above, you think twice to take such a huge amount of money into your debt if you really want to invest or not.
Exactly.
So at Rabobank, we put out a paper just before the holidays a few months ago, and I don't know if this was a bold prediction or not. Maybe I'll seek your opinion on this, but our research showed that 2025 will probably be the peak milk producing year for the EU. We're expecting a decline in 26 and then additionally in the short, medium, and long term. So is IFCN of the same or similar opinion that 2025 was peak milk for the EU?
Yes.
Okay.
At least at the moment, yes.
As of what we know, yes. You never know what will happen in the future. What
Exactly.
might be, let's say, a pink swan instead of a black swan, which could boost more milk production in Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. With the current conditions, yes, that's what we are expecting. This is just a momentum and everything will go back. Environmental
Part of the
regulations are
driver
not going
behind
to go
that's
away.
regulatory.
Sorry?
The part of the driver behind that's regulatory in Europe.
Yes, yes. Environmental regulations are very, very much impacting how farmers are behaving, as Philip was saying. So farms here are around 100, 300 cows. So that's, and I'm talking even about, not even about Eastern Europe, right? About Western Europe, Eastern Europe are even smaller. If you, of course, Czech Republic is different, but anyways. Well, in the US, you have these, are not even farms anymore, are businesses. When you have over 1,000 cows, those are businesses and are run very much differently. We have the aging population as farmers, so as Philip was saying, and those are the issues that they are facing. And then now, okay, economics have been good, but I have the capacity to invest, but shall I invest in what? Is it going to be worth it? Am I going to get a return out of it? Because many investments since that may even will need to be compulsory instead of just, oh, I would like to increase my revenues. It's just I need to comply with certain new rules. So it's something I will have to do instead of I want to do.
And what is coming on top, it's not just environmental regulations, it's also, dairy farming is a 24/7 job. And what we also see here nowadays in northern Germany, for example, is last year a farmer has quit his job, 300 cows. It was quite good. It was economic profitable. But what was he doing? He was renting out his land, putting out solar panels there. As he also said, I get even more and I don't need to work 24/7. So why I should make my life more complicated if I can have even a better life with just renting out for alternative ways and energy?
Yeah, it's true. In cases like the Netherlands that we were visiting last year in our conference, it was also very curious to see how Dutch farmers are behaving because environmental regulations there are even stronger. They have this pressure to reduce the number of animals quite strongly. And now how they are managing their farms is everything around dairy, but the income is not coming from milk directly. Is coming from, as Philip was saying, having solar panels there, or manure management, or renting the land or gaining some subsidies from the land because they are uh, not using the land, but it's then used for, I don't know, birds that can be that can stay there. So like protection areas. So they are using everything around dairy, but the main income is not coming from milk exactly.
Yeah.
So and that's the way they are behaving now, or they are renting the equipment, or they are doing anything else. Or agrotourism is something that is happening in Germany as well. It's quite popular actually.
Certainly interesting. It's our take that the volume of milk production is still going to be substantial across the continent and certainly enough to be self-sufficient. But we just see exports declining from the EU and EU using more of that milk internally. But that creates lots of opportunities for places like the US, for example. I mean, we've seen exports grow tremendously in 2024, 2025. Probably will continue to see strength in 2026. So as we in the US produce more and more, we will rely on both expanded export markets as Europe contracts, in addition to our domestic growth here in the US.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
Lucas, where do you see that the bulk of those exports trending towards? And obviously, we've had an interesting, I would say, trade environment in the last 12 months, and certainly the U.S. dollar weakness, at least from an export perspective, is a good thing, right? So I think that's obviously impacting and maybe rebalancing trade flows. Kind of what's Rabobank's perspective on that, and how would you view that if you're a U.S. dairy producer here in the next year or so?
Yeah, key markets are, I think this is a positive, a wide variety of regions, and it's almost dependent on which product we're talking about. When we think in some, Mexico is number one, and will remain number one, especially on things like cheese and non-fat dry milk. But other parts of the world, China is really important on dry whey, permeates, and lactose. To your point on trade policy and tariffs, China is really the only spot where we saw a few weeks of challenges in 2025 when the US-China trade relationship escalated, and then we kind of tempered things back and were able to negotiate out what that trade relationship looks like in the future. But other places, Japan and South Korea, are huge on cheese. Southeast Asia is huge on non-fat dry milk. And then increasingly some further Central American, South American countries. But we mentioned butter earlier. I think actually, as we are speaking, we are getting December 2025 data for exports. So we will finally know the answer if 2025 was a record high butter export year. So unfortunately, if we were a few hours later, I'd have that answer. But it's certainly possible that 2025 was an all-time record high year for butter. We already know that it was for cheese. So all
Yes.
good signs there for dairy producers.
Yes. Well, that wouldn't surprise me. Definitely, US is strong right now.
Yeah.
Actually, and I would like to get your opinion a little bit, because we are also even looking further into the future, not only this year, next year, but let's say the next 10 years. We are seeing US becoming quite strong in production. As you said, Europe is more stagnating or growing slowly. Of course, we are still self-sufficient, but the market is the one that is going to be affected because there is not going to be huge surplus to be exported, and probably it's going to be more into premium products. But then the US, we see it differently. We think the US is going to use the opportunity to become bigger exporter, increase in production, no restrictions regarding the increase in the number of animals. So what we are estimating right now is milk production will come mostly the increase in the increase of animals rather than the milk yield, because the milk yield is already quite high. So of course, it can still become a little bit more efficient, but it also gets to a point that so much can a cow give. So it's going to also
But we've been saying that for years, by the way, right? And it keeps going up,
right? Yeah.
I think I almost disagree on that point, because when you look at the average milk per cow take the entire US average from the data, we're still looking at 75, 80 pounds of milk per cow per day, which it is still far, far below the high performing groups on all
definitely
dairies.
can still, yes, but it's not like it's gonna double or triple. That's my point. But it's also gonna rely heavily on the increase in the herd sizes. And on top of that, also domestic consumption might not increase as much. At least per capita consumption might not change much. What's your view on it?
I think that milk per cow will be the driver of milk production growth. For right now, we're a little bit of an outlier. We're at 9.6 million cows, but for a few decades now, we've been kind of around that 9.4, 9.5 million cow number. As small farms kind of go out of business, consolidation occurs on the larger farms, the number of animals doesn't change as much, but that impact on milk per cow and yield growth is tremendous. And both from a production standpoint, a sustainability standpoint, however you want to look at it. But yeah, I do agree. I think that domestic consumption, per capita consumption, does have a little bit of room to grow. On some products, cheese, we've kind of topped out over the past few years, but other products, butter, yogurt, whey protein, all continuing to grow. So there's some growth domestically, but I think that exports will be a huge absorber of a lot of the expected expansion that we are seeing in the U.S.
Yeah, to kind of build on some of that, Lucas, is that we've seen some dramatic improvements due to genomics in the productivity of these cows over the last 10 years. we don't see that stopping yet. I think the barrier right now is, how do we feed these cows? I'm not sure we know how to do that. And those are some of the conversations we have on this podcast. But, we got cows producing over 7 pounds of solids per day right now. And we got Holsteins producing like jerseys.
Mm-hmm.
And so
that's my line. Come on, I've been using that.
So I think that's going to have a significant impact on supply and where it's coming from, and maybe because the genetics that the Europeans and the Asian continent have are basically the same, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that our genetics is outpacing our ability to manage and feed them.
And I think what to add there also, Scott, is the whole AI, which can come on top to help the farmer to find better feed ratios, increase the feed availability and all this stuff, to increase then even furthermore the output. So I think, as I think Rabobank, you also did a study in the past that agriculture is one of the least digitalized sectors across. So there's also huge upscale if this whole digitalization in the agriculture will also pop in. How other sectors are already benefiting from it, it could be also another upscale, not only for the US, but I think majorly in the US, because they are also early adopters and they are more open for such kind of new technologies, let's say like this, than the conservative farmers here over at the continent in Europe.
Yeah, lots of opportunities for growth there. But yeah, I think on the genomics and components point, it's really fascinating to see. But I am a little maybe not concerned, maybe seems like too strong of a word, but cautious about the level of milk fat that we're seeing come off the farm at this point. Tremendous growth over the past decade. We've seen butter markets kind of crash lower in the US throughout the past several months. I think markets finally understand that we have abundant milk fat, abundant cream, butter demand growing, but no questions on overall supply. Into the future, though, even if we wanted to increase the protein content in the milk or continue to increase solids, it's very difficult to decouple fat from protein,
right,
or stop fat growth with still adding to protein. And also, to your point, there's no going back. I mean, we continue to breed better and better animals for efficiency, for yield, for profitability. And again, once we're at this benchmark, we're not going to slow down. So I think that we do have, as an industry, some questions about where is this fat going to go now that we've started to create it all.
Yeah, and I think it's from a nutritional perspective as well, Lucas. I mean, it's in some ways, and probably there's dairy nutritionists that would argue, with this. And I'm not a nutritionist, but it has apparently been easier and cheaper to produce more milk fat, butter fat, than it is protein, right? So we obviously saw, a strong response from the market to, historically high butterfat prices in the U.S. We produced a lot of butterfat, to your point, too much now. And, I was actually hearing stories from, dairy producers and from nutritionists where, the milk fat content is actually too high in some of the milk and in some of the cheese plants, and other processors were starting to push back on this and actually dock and penalize producers for having too high of milk fat, which is really kind of crazy if you think about it, right? Because it used to be a system where if your levels were too low in either milk protein or milk fat, you would get docked, right? And now we're actually hitting the ceiling, apparently in some cases. So it will be very interesting to see how that does balance out, right? Because I think that, to your point, there's still really strong demand for milk protein and cheese and some of these other products produced with that you're going to get butterfat to come along with, right? So
yeah.
But
yeah,
sorry, Lucas, go ahead.
I was just going to add, certain co-ops, certain processors capping or limiting the amount they pay for butterfat. And then, to your point, cheese plants that in some cases historically we've never heard of having to spin off fat, needing to kind of get that ratio of fat to protein into the perfect scenario for cheese making. So yeah, some wild stories happening from the countryside.
Lucas, we were talking earlier at the beginning of the pubcast here about the high protein Starbucks drink that you had, I think, right? And you're starting to see this, in a lot of cases, at least in the U.S. You walk into the grocery store, right, and everything is, protein this or protein that. We have the Fairlife, milk that's, high protein concentration. You can get extra protein in your Starbucks drink. Like, how do you see this playing out, and how do you see that specific kind of trend in nutrition, whether it's a trend or a fad? How do you see that impacting the economics of the mixture of milk going forward?
I think broadly speaking, it's great for dairy, and dairy is really well positioned from the current conversations around food and nutrition, whether that's in the dietary guidelines, real food, minimally processed food, fewer ingredient foods. Almost all dairy products fit that narrative and fit that science in many cases. But yeah, the protein story is real. It's expanding, and it doesn't seem to be a short-term fad or trend. I mean, there's science behind it. A lot of consumers are changing the way that they feel by changing their diets, and it's all positive, right? Whether it's cheese, whether it's yogurt, whether it's sour cream, whether it's mixing whey protein in my milk at Starbucks, it's all super positive. And the more that dairy can fulfill the need that consumers are craving and that consumers are naturally wanting, it's good for everyone along the supply chain, not only farmers, but not only processors, co-ops, not only grocery stores, restaurants, but in the end, consumers that are hopefully being healthier because of it.
Yeah, Andrea, so this, I think, is a U.S. trend. Can you talk about maybe some trends from the demand side that's going to shape the dairy industry going forward?
Yeah, that's definitely the US, because when I look at because we were not long ago analyzing the milk content from the US comparing to Germany, and you saw like how the US, the fat was something like this, but Germany was not really reacting to those trends. So I would say the consumption patterns here in Europe are a little bit different, are more stable, so to say. The preferences haven't changed that much. Even what was probably a bigger, because we have seen this protein as well that is also combined with the medicine that is going there to consume more protein with this fat reduction, lost weight medicine that is there. But I think probably the one that was impacting most here in Europe was the vegan alternatives. But even not long ago, the EU Commission prohibited vegan options to be called milk. So now, of course, the brands is not butter, is not milk, and then they put the word huge. But I would say the trends are very much different than in the US.
But
Yeah.
partly, Andrea, because what we also see, what we have been seeing in the past 17, when the whole butter story started in the US, it was 1 year later coming to Europe. And now we also see slightly higher protein demand, and all this putting proteins into, like Lucas, you took it now at Starbucks with the coffee. There's some additional whey protein in. So we also see this trend now slightly swapping over the ocean, so to say, to Europe as well. So it is always a time of measures, similar like the weather. So when you have 6 weeks before a winter storm in the US, it is mainly 6 weeks later we somehow feel something in Europe as well. So it's just a time delay. So it's just a matter of time when the real activation will be also in Europe, because what we currently see is also that those companies who are producing those whey proteins are currently those who are making really money also in Europe. So there is a huge profitability behind these businesses as well, and we see also more and more promotion coming.
No, it's definitely profitable. that we know. But in my opinion, probably it's a cultural thing. But I think these kind of trends in the US are much stronger than it happened in Europe. I'm not saying it's not happening, but I'm not saying it will happen with the strongest way that happens in the US. Because, I'm originally from Venezuela, so we have a lot of American influence. So when something is on trend, we all go in it. It doesn't matter if we like it or not, we just do it because it's on trend. I see Europe doesn't react as strongly as American people in general do when there is a new trend. So it's of course happening. We can see it, but I don't think it's happening or will happen with the same strength that happened in the US. Because why did farmers react at producing more fat? I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. And why did Germans didn't do it? They could also do it. Why didn't they do it?
But Andrea, what we also need to take there into consideration is, for example, in Germany, we are already at a high level of fat producing in the contents of the milk. So the US
That's
just
also
started
true.
also 10 years ago to increase to, I think in 2 years ago, so in 2024, they reached somehow the levels what we are producing since 20 years already in Germany.
That's
So
also very true.
that's why it's also a kind of adaptation and just natural habit if you're going into this export positions more and more, that you produce more fat at this point with also the breeds, genomics, what Scott you mentioned as well. So it is a kind of natural development as well.
I think we could
Easier
also
to grow
say,
when we're at a smaller base, right?
Yeah.
Just like
Yes,
the
of
beginning of
course.
the
Yeah.
beginning of the conversation, from easy to see that substantial growth in milk production in 25 when 24 was on a decline. Simple math there.
yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say it could be said that the Americans could probably use better diets, and so than the Europeans, and so maybe that's going to make a stronger trend there. Kind of in line with that, so we've recently turned our milk pyramid or our food pyramid upside down, and so I'm kind of curious. I'll start with Lucas. What impact, if any, do you see that having here in the United States? And then I'd like to get an opinion from the Europeans to see if that's going to have any impact at all over there.
I think primarily it's important from a cultural and conversational standpoint most immediately. I think over the longer term, it does have real impacts on things like school lunch programs, SNAP programs, women and infants and children programs, and any of those government programs that do need to comply with those guidelines. But that's going to take a little bit of time to actually play out and change and come through, or hopefully we'll be able to see that come through in the data. But I think primarily, the conversation about the first few lines in the guidelines were eat real food. So whether that's fruits, whether that's vegetables, whether that's nuts, whether that's dairy, and whether that's animal protein or plant protein, I mean, all of those foods qualify as real food. So I think it's good for dairy. I think it's good for balanced diets. I think it's good for Americans who are looking for something simple to just take advice on how to eat, what to eat. And I think ultimately, considering some of the policy positions or discussions, especially revolving around things that come out of DC, I was overall pretty impressed at the USDA and finding balance in the new dietary guidelines.
Yeah. Andrea, Philip, any thoughts?
Shall I start, Andrea?
You can start, yes.
Okay. So I think this whole pyramid thing is not that commonly used even anymore in Europe. It's more like a plate style, healthy plate, so to say. So that's why if we would turn it around the plate, we would eat nothing anymore. So that's why it wouldn't be recommended to do so. So that's why I think we have a kind of different approach over here with this healthy plate models, or like a more like guidelines and nutritional circles, so to say. So that's why it is. It has been also going through the news here, but I think it will be not that easy applicable over here in Europe also, as it is always more difficult in Europe as we are having different states, and then the EU Commission who then makes some decisions, and then the states needs to be implemented, and even then they have some playground. So that's why I think it's more US based discussions,
Yes,
which can be
I
not
agree.
that easily transferred, let's say, to Europe.
I
I do
fully
think
agree.
it is interesting, though. I mean, we were just talking about, is protein a fad? Is protein a trend? It speaks to the broader thoughts around how food evolves over the years and decades. I was going back and looking through previous versions of the guidelines recently, and then I found the food pyramid that I remember being taught when I was 6, 7, 8 years old in elementary school. And that one in the mid 90s, it recommended like 6 to 12 servings of bread every day. And if you go back and look at it, the entire like bottom third of the pyramid was just loaves of bread and pasta. And it just seems wild to think that, those were the recommendations 30 years ago. So, and it kind of speaks to how science maybe changes, evolves, recommends different things, food changes and evolves, and right now I think we can be thankful that dairy is being shed in quite a good light by both dietary guidelines and kind of consumer preferences.
Exactly. But I fully agree with Philip because, again, I was raised in Venezuela, so I'm also used to the pyramid and what to eat a lot and what to don't eat much. But now my kids are in school and it's like, okay, where is the pyramid? He is not learning the pyramid. He is, okay, you have here your lunchbox and what needs to be in your lunchbox. So you need to have more of this and less of that. So it's a very different approach that they are using here. So I don't really see a big impact from this happening here in Europe.
Yeah. Wayne Gretzky famously said, you need to skate to where the puck is going and not where it's at today. So let's kind of use that as a transition to talk about the part of the presentation, Andrea, of where's it going in 2035? And maybe if you could couch that in terms of both consumption trends as well as production trends.
Yes. Well, what we are seeing is basically in 10 years from now is more or less the same that we have here now, in the sense of main exporters and main producers are going to still be the US, Europe, New Zealand are the ones going to be providing milk to the world. But where we see differences is in the growth rates. So we see Oceania, of course, even if it's not growing much or will not grow much until 2035 or in the next 10 years, they are in very high levels of self-sufficiency, so above 250%. So they definitely provide more to the world when they need to consume. Europe will be more closer to the 100% line, as you were mentioning also, Lucas, will have enough for itself, but will not provide too much to the rest of the world. And the one that we are seeing increasing the most is the US. So the US is going to be producing more, as I was saying. Well, okay, we think probably you are right in the sense that it's not that we don't see that they are going to be more efficient in the milk yield, of course, but if the ambitions of increasing in exports will go to the levels that we are estimating, so also an increase in the number of animals is somehow expected. But of course, that's what we are estimating from the trends and what we see from now. That's the way we estimate our outlooks and the challenges that Europe is facing. So in Europe, we are having like two sides. We are having Eastern Europe and we are having Western Europe. So Western Europe struggling to increase in production, struggling, not increasing in animals, increasing slightly in milk yield, but not enough to compensate the loss of animals. Whereas Eastern Europe...
Maybe Andrea, to refer also for the listeners, because maybe not most of them or not all of them are aware of Eastern Europe. So Western Europe is more the traditional dairy countries like Germany, France, Netherlands, while Eastern Europe is more the the Poland, Hungary, Czech, so those
Czech
regions.
Republic,
Just
exactly.
a short refer. Yeah.
Clarification, yeah, exactly. So especially Poland is doing great and has been doing great, and we expect that it will do great over the next years. But that is not going to compensate the losses that we have in Eastern Europe, or that we foresee in Eastern Europe. So that's mainly what we are seeing from the consumption and production patterns. So basically, other regions like China are going to increase in consumption more than in production, so will remain net importers and will depend on the markets. We are seeing some interesting trends in Asia, so North and Southeast Asia, where they are demanding even more or having more westernized diets, so eating more cheese and butter and having other interests. Nigeria, basically, sorry, not Nigeria, but it's Africa, countries like Nigeria in Africa, increasing their demand, but mostly based on their population, because they are growing fast in population. But what they demand the most is powders. In the Middle East, also an interest on fatty products is been seen, but they will also remain a deficit country. So meaning that they will import more or they will need to import in order to satisfy the needs. And interesting cases are in Latin America, because we have top exporters there like Argentina and Uruguay, but they are mainly supplying the region. So not much is going out from Latin America to other countries, and whatever is going the most is, of course, also powders.
And I think to add there also, I think as the world is getting richer, that's why also they are going to demand in a different kind of way, like Andrea, you mentioned, with the westernized diets. And that's why we also expect until 35 or even afterwards as well, that the gap between supply and demand, or there will be a gap between supply and demand, because demand is rising faster than supply, which at the end mathematically is not possible, because supply and demand needs always equal out. But at the end, what does it mean in an easy nutshell? It means prices for dairy products will be rising still.
Exactly. Lack of availability and lack of affordability, or affordability issues, because less will be there, or not less, but will not grow as fast. So it means prices will go higher, and then who are the ones that are going to be buying these products? And as we were saying before, Europe might also go more into premium products, because not much will be left for the rest of the world. Why not go premium? And then you have countries like Japan that have the purchasing power buying products, and now you can eat sushi with camembert, for example.
Yeah, we've done a lot of similar work on this as well. Largely agree with all of your comments on both where is the milk going to come from and where is it going to go. And ultimately, I mean, apologies, I'll bring it back to the U.S. Perspective.
You are the expert.
But it's at the end of the day, it's encouraging for the U.S. industry, whether it's farmers, processors, co-ops, no matter where you sit, because we agree with some of your analysis. We see demand growing at a quicker rate than total global supply. So it even begs the question, will that force the US to grow even more than we already expect to be growing? And that's why we're also seeing billions and billions. I don't know the exact number. It changes every week, it seems. 11, 12 billion dollars being spent in new dairy processing capacity, whether it's new plants or expansions on existing plants, because we anticipate the need for that growth. Co-ops can make investments in capacity and allow their farmers to grow. And overall, it's a good story for the industry here.
Exactly. And that's why I was asking, how did you see the increase in the number of animals? Because it depends on the growth, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Sure. So
and Lucas, to that point, I think, one of the things I would say, almost from my perspective, that I see as a long-term leading indicator is in trends that we're seeing shift and evolve in how we feed cows. And what we're starting to see with these very efficient, I would say highly technical nutritionist herds that are being fed by them, they're starting to look into the next realm of amino acids, vitamins, nutrients, etc., to take, I think, the milk output, the component quality, the component output to the next level. And I don't see that slowing down or not expanding. So I think it is very interesting. I think we're going to see that trend accelerate. I think we're going to get higher yield, higher efficiencies out of these cows. And like Scott said earlier in the presentation, we've said we're going to top out, or this is going to slow down, every year for the last 20 years, and it never does, right, Scott? So I think it's really interesting and exciting. I think it's an exciting time to be in dairy. I think the future is bright, and should be a really fun spot to be for the next 10, 15, 20 years, right? So
yeah.
And beyond.
It depends on in which region you are. As you're speaking from the US perspective, yes, I fully agree. But especially in Europe, the competition is also quite high, and we are a bit more fragmented, let's say, like this than the US market. So that's why I think fully agree with your points on the US market. And there's not only for the US market great opportunities for everyone who's related with the dairy has a great future in terms of how it is expected, at least from us analysts and experts, how the future might look like.
Good point.
Yeah. So we get ready to wind down here. Is there any big issues that we've not addressed just yet?
There are always black swans, which unfortunately no one knows when they happen, and they are always coming at the point when you need them the least. So I think there are a lot of geopolitical tensions at the moment who could disrupt the market in a positive or a negative way. You never know in which direction it is going, but let's keep it positive, and I think it's better than closing positive than also for the listeners than talking about issues, challenges, because I think the opportunities are greater than the challenges.
Yeah, sounds good, Philip. So the next time we get together, and we will get together because this has been a lot of fun. Well, first question will be, what did we right? What did we not predict last time? Again, as they flickered the lights, that means it's last call. And what I'd like you guys to do is we'll go around the room, just kind of sum it up for us. What are some real key takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience, or maybe it's something that you learned today that you'd like to share as well. And Jeremy, if you wouldn't mind, can I start with you, sir?
5 cents might not seem like much until you're saving 5 cents per cow per day. Then it really adds up. New AminoSure XM precision-release methionine provides the optimal combination of cost, feed stability, rumen stability, and intestinal release to deliver the best cost per unit of available methionine on the market today.
Yeah, I just think it's interesting to get a global perspective, right? Because I think, when we start to talk about the regional differences, whether that's opportunities or challenges, clearly there's a different outlook depending on where you're sitting, right? But I think at a very macro level, at a very high level, I think the dairy industry globally is a good spot to be. I think it's going to be a growing expanding market. And I think it'll be interesting to see, kind of what regions, win and capitalize from that, and maybe other areas that, potentially pull back, Scott, and maybe, do something different, right, with their land, with their herds, with their operations. But overall, I think it's a fascinating market, and I'd be curious to see how it continues to evolve.
Yeah, well said, Jeremy. Philip, your perspectives.
I think we should all stay optimistic. After a thunderstorm or a bad weather, there's always sunshine and sunlight coming. And I think it has been over the past years quite a good sunlight days, let's say like this, for the dairy industry. Now it is getting a bit more cloudy, but there's already light at the end of the funnel, let's say like this. So I think staying positive, going through the markets, and taking the facts and figures into consideration, and not just the stomach feeling is getting more and more crucial. because you never know what will happen in the future. But if you have the right tools or right mechanism to check, you can feel much more comfortable.
Yeah, great comments. Lucas.
I think I'm going to go back to some of what we talked about in the first half, and just the importance of diversification of income that dairy farmers are seeing in multiple regions, whether it's beef or calf income in the US. We were talking about solar panels and other sources of income and things that farmers are doing in Europe. I think that is really important to the farmer listeners. There are some years in the US where 99% of revenue came from milk, and then you're always reliant on the milk price and that sometimes razor thin margin with feed costs. But the more that we can diversify income, I think that puts farmers on better footing for longer term economic success.
All right, great, excellent. Andrea, I'm going to give you the final words.
No, I think the importance of dairy, and dairy will always find its way. It's just important. We need it. It's part of the basic nutrition, not only for Europeans or Americans, for everywhere around the world. Dairy is just important. Even countries that were not consuming dairy 10, 20 years ago now are consuming it. Even school programs where dairy is starting to be somehow compulsory. So that also highlights the relevance of dairy, of milk. And what I'm looking forward is to see the developments of fat and protein in the US. I really want to see how it is going to go later.
Yeah. Love those comments about the importance of milk, Andrea. And I want to thank you for the presentation for this podcast, to the all the guests here today. This has been a fun one. I've loved the interaction between the different regions and the different perspectives. I think it's been very enlightening, and as I said before, would love to do it again. So I want to thank you guys for joining me today. Also to our loyal audience, as always, thank you for coming along. We hope you learned something. We hope you had some fun, and hope to see you next time here at Real Science Exchange, where it's always happy hour and you're always among friends. Cheers, everyone.
We'd love to hear your comments or ideas for topics and guests, so please reach out via email at anh.marketing@balchem.com with any suggestions, and we'll work hard to add them to the schedule. Don't forget to leave a 5-star rating on your way out. You can request your Real Science Exchange t-shirt in just a few easy steps. Just like or subscribe to the Real Science Exchange and send us a screenshot along with your address and t-shirt size to anh.marketing@balchem.com. Balchem's Real Science Lecture Series of webinars takes place on the first Tuesday of every month, with the top research and nutrition topics that will impact your business. We also include small ruminant, monogastric, and companion animal-focused topics throughout the year. Visit balchem.com/realscience to see the upcoming topics and to register for future webinars. You can also access past webinars and search for the topics most important to you.